everybody, and thank you so much for coming tonight to an exploration of electromagnetic fields and what it means to you. The exposure from electromagnetic fields. We are so lucky tonight to have joining us two extraordinary leaders in this area who I admire both very greatly. I feel that to have a new, fresh perspective tonight's going to benefit all of us in a greater understanding of what it means to have a safe relationship with our cell phones and with the cell phone towers. Our first speaker tonight is Magda Havas, Dr. Magda Havas. Her book is here, Public Health SOS, The Shadow Side of the Wireless Revolution. And you may look at it at the intermission. I recommend that you do so. Magda has done extraordinary research in studying the biological effects of excessive EMF exposure. Her expertise is extraordinary, and I feel so gifted to introduce you to her tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. You're welcome. And I'm just going to ask if you could turn the lights off. So I'm sorry it's going to be a bit dark for the filming, but we're really here to show this to people. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and I'd just like to start this particular presentation with something that was on the news just a little while ago in Channel 2 News.
I want to pay close attention to this next story. A first in the nation school assembly in the Bay Area today featured experts explaining the health risks of cell phones. KTVU Health and Science Editor John Fowler joins us now with a story you'll only see here on Channel 2. John?
A provocative day at San Leandro High School where many young people say they'll now change the way they use their cell phones. Some call it an experiment on an entire generation. Like most students, nearly all here at San Leandro High use cell phones, some a lot.
More than I should. Really, I pick my phone over my homework most of the time.
How many of you have one of those earpieces?
At a special assembly today, videotaped for a film, 300 students heard the latest science.
We are here to warn the kids.
Good morning, everybody.
Elizabeth Kelly of the International Commission on Electromagnetic Safety brought in researchers who just testified in Senate hearings.
We discover the cell phone radiation. One is that it damage DNA.
That years of use triples risk of brain tumors.
This is personal.
Ellie Marks of Lafayette told students doctors diagnosed her husband Alan with terminal brain cancer.
Stating that my husband's tumor is attributed to his long-term cell phone use, which means if someone uses one greater than 10 years.
New research suggests begin as a teen, brain tumor risk raises 5-fold. And that's just one problem.
And the other thing is that it all affects the function of the brain, and it can make a person forgetful.
This is the way we go to school.
Students saw this British video illustrating invisible cell phone radiation. Britain's top medical officer advises children under 16 to avoid cell phone use. But in the U.S.,
People who provide cell phones don't want you to know the information about some of the potentially harmful effects of it. I think cell phones are the cigarettes of the 21st century.
advice?
Don't put it by their head. That's the most intensive exposure. Use a headset.
I'm not going to stop using my cell phone, but I'll probably stop using it that much, whatever, because seeing kind of those stuff is kind of scary.
Actually, I'm going to ask my parents to get me texting so I don't not talking as much.
Some didn't buy it.
Just see it as propaganda and just a way to try and control things.
The cell phone industry and the FDA maintain that cell phones are safe. New studies at the National Institutes of Health are now underway. Reporting live, Health and Science Editor John Fowler, KTVU Channel 2 News.
Great. Well, you saw something that just aired a few days ago, so we're trying to be very, very current with our presentations today. I'm going to be sharing with you some of the research that I do working with people who are electrically sensitive and sharing with you those studies. When Libby and I were discussing what we would present here, Libby suggested that I show at least some of the slides that I had for the presentation at the school a few days ago. And basically my presentation was about 8 minutes long, and it linked the similarities between cell phones and cigarette smoking. And some of the information that I presented to the students, I'm going to show you here. This is a cell phone study that was done by Leonard Hardell, who I think is one of the leading scientists in the world. He's in Sweden, and he's doing some of the most remarkable research doing cell phone studies looking at different types of tumors. He's also reviewing different epidemiological studies. And this is from a paper that just came out this year. A lot of the research I'm going to present to you will have appeared within the last 3 years, so very, very recent work. And according to his study, he found that after 10 years of cell phone use, there's an increased risk of ipsilateral tumors. And ipsilateral is just a fancy way of saying same side of the head tumors. And the 3 types of tumors that he documented from the studies that he reviewed were gliomas, which is a brain tumor, acoustic neuroma, which is a tumor that affects the nerve that goes to the ear and is involved with hearing, and uveal melanoma, which is a tumor that affects the eye. And you can see here the percentage increased risk of developing these tumors after 10 years of cell phone use on the same side of the head that you use your cell phone. We were talking to children and we asked them, who do you think is at the greatest risk? And it turns out from this study that if you were under the age of 20 when you first started using your cell phone, that puts you into the highest risk category. And for these people, the risk was 420% increase when they're using after 10 years of cell phone use. One of the reasons I think that we're using this technology so much is it's very convenient, and the types of cell phones you can buy right now allow you to take photographs, they play music, you can do all sorts of things with them, you can text message your friends, and they're being marketed for the younger and younger generation. So here we have ads that appeal to children with teddy bear cell phones, and we have ads that appeal to teenagers saying that, you know, this is how you keep connected with your friends. And so, you know, everyone wants to be connected. But what age is too young? How does it affect women who are pregnant? In this case, using a cell phone and also using a laptop, possibly in the wireless mode. And you can see here a fetus that is exposed to this form of radiation. Well, a study came out. This was reported in the Independent in the United Kingdom. This came out in 2008. Warning, using a mobile phone while pregnant can seriously damage your baby. Study of 13,000 children exposes link between the use of a handset and later behavioral problems. So, you know, we have to be very concerned. We tell pregnant women not to smoke, not to drink alcohol, to be very careful with what type of medication they take, and we should actually warn them about using wireless technology at the same time. What about preconception? What happens to the sperm and the egg prior to conception? Well, a lot of men keep their cell phones in their hip pockets, and that's very close to their genitals, which could affect sperm. And this is a study, once again, that came out in 2008, and it shows you what happens with men who have been going to fertility clinics who are having difficulty impregnating their wives. And in this particular study, they looked at men who did not use a cell phone. These are in the green in this area. Those who used a cell phone for less than 2 hours a day in blue, 2 to 4 hours a day in red, and greater than 4 hours a day in black. And you can see here that there's no difference in the volume, no difference in liquefaction time or in pH or in viscosity of the semen. However, there's a change in sperm count. So there's fewer sperm the more you use a cell phone. There's a change in motility. The sperm are a lot slower than they are in control men. And there's a decrease in viability as well. So the sperm simply aren't able to do, they're not staying alive long enough to do the job. And there's a change in the morphology, the shape of the sperm, which ultimately leads to the changes in motility and viability. And then, because this is, I'm a scientist and I like to share things scientifically, I thought it was very important to show students some highly technical information. And I explained to them that they might have a little bit of difficulty following, but to give it a try. And this is, the next slide I'm going to show you depicts what happens to sperm that's damaged either by chemicals or radiation. one to make contact with the A. So basically, the information that we presented to the students a few days ago was cell phones have been linked with tumors of the brain, the ear, and the eye, pregnant behavioral problems in women who are pregnant, and problems with sperm leading to infertility. One of the things we didn't have time to mention because we had very short presentations was electrohypersensitivity. And this is probably the thing I'm most passionate about. I talk to people almost on a daily basis. I get email from people on a daily basis who have developed a sensitivity to electromagnetic energy, and their lives have been very seriously affected. They're not dying of brain tumors, they're not having difficulty reproducing, but their lives have, the quality of their lives have really diminished because of their exposure to this energy. And what I'm going to do is share with you some of the research I've done and regarding electrohypersensitivity, and try to convince you that this is really a very serious and growing problem in our society. In 2004, the World Health Organization held a conference on electrohypersensitivity in Prague, and I was fortunate enough to attend that particular meeting. And this is their definition of electrohypersensitivity: a phenomenon where individuals experience adverse health effects while using or being in the vicinity of devices emanating electric, magnetic, or electromagnetic fields. They go on to say, whatever its cause, EHS is a real and sometimes a debilitating problem for the affected persons. Their exposures are generally several orders of magnitude under the limits of internationally accepted standards. In Canada, Health Canada is responsible for setting the guidelines, just like the Federal Communication Commission is responsible here for setting guidelines to microwave radiation. And in Canada, they've made a concession. They say that certain members of the general public may be more susceptible to harm from radio frequency and microwave exposure. So they're beginning to recognize that not all of us have the same sensitivity to this energy. However, they haven't done much to change the guidelines. When we talk about symptoms of electrical hypersensitivity, they include the nervous system, they include the heart, the respiratory system, the skin, the eyes, and various other things, including digestive problems. So the symptoms really vary from individual to individual, depending on what your most sensitive reaction is. The weakest chain, link in your chain is probably what's going to be affected by this form of exposure. There was a letter written by Holberg and Oberfeld in 2006, and this they basically looked at a variety of studies to find out what is the prevalence of electrical hypersensitivity in our society. And you can see here that in 1985 the percentage was very, very low, and it doesn't matter which country we're talking about, the prevalence seems to be increasing. So the percentage of people who claim to be electrically hypersensitive is increasing. We don't know if that's due to a true increase in society or whether it's due to an awareness of the issue. And some people who think they're electrically hypersensitive may not be. We don't have any diagnostic tests as yet to determine your electrical sensitivity. By 2017, they estimate that 50% of the population will have the symptoms of electrohypersensitivity. And this is just a few years down the road. I use a very conservative estimate. I use 3% for severe electrohypersensitivity. And so when I'm asked how many people are likely to be affected, there's really a gradient. At the low end of the scale here, where we have severe symptoms, my number, the number I use, is about 3%, and that may not be the right number. About 35% I think are moderately sensitive, and that's based on studies that we've done in a school environment looking at teachers, so it may not apply to the general population. And possibly as much as 50% are already experiencing mild symptoms of sensitivity. And if we take these numbers and extend them to the Canadian and American population, what we're really talking about here in the United States of severe sensitivity is probably close to 10 million people. And if we believe the 35% number for moderately sensitive, we're talking about a third of the population, or about 100 million people. That's why I think electrohypersensitivity is probably the most serious health event that we're experiencing in North America. And when I tell people, why is this becoming a problem? Well, one of the reasons it's becoming more of a problem is because our exposures are increasing. And I use the flood analogy. If the level of water is very low, it's probably not going to do any of us too much damage. Once the level goes over our heads, there's only so long that we can tread water before we go under. And I think this is what's coming. The levels are simply going higher and higher and higher, and a greater population is being submersed in this energy. And if we look at why this is a problem, we have over 4 billion cell phone users in the world today. When I talked to the school environment, I was trying to make the point that there's a very close similarity between cigarette smoking and using a cell phone, in that cigarette smoking has been linked to lung disease, heart disease. Cell phones have been linked to various tumors. Well, we never had 4 billion people on the planet smoking, but we have 4 billion cell phone users. Each of these cell phones requires antennas, so we're putting up more and more antennas into communities, and I know that's one of the issues that you're dealing with today. There's also something known as Wi-Fi and WiMAX. WiMAX has a radius of 30 miles, so you can put up an antenna that's incredibly powerful, just so that we can have good reception with our computers and with our cell phones. We also are beginning to put more and more wireless technology into school environments, and I think this is a very, very serious mistake, particularly in elementary schools where you have young children who are still developing, who are extremely sensitive to any kind of potential toxicant in the environment. There's also something known as smart meters. These are meters that are being placed on houses and buildings. They record the amount of electricity you use, and they send that information very often in a wireless fashion back to the utility so that they can price you differentially depending on what time of day you're using it. People who are electrically sensitive, who have had smart meters placed on their homes, find that they can't use the room immediately adjacent to where that smart meter is because they've simply developed too strong a reaction to the radiation. There's also something known as broadband over power lines that's being used and proposed for a number of communities. And we have evidence that that is probably going to make a lot of people sick very, very quickly. And it will take some time for the medical community to recognize what the illness is, because the illnesses are really so general. Compact fluorescent light bulbs, we're being asked to use energy efficient light bulbs. The most affordable ones are the compact fluorescents, and they're making people sick as well. And I'm going to show you some evidence of that in a little while. And then finally, there's something called wireless electricity that's being tested as we speak, with the hope that will come into more and more homes. So we're really relying on this technology to a degree that's causing our exposure to be we're being inundated with it, just like the flood. And the question is, where is Noah's Ark? How are we going to protect the people who have developed sensitivity? And how are we going to protect the rest of us who are not yet electrically sensitive? And I think that's a very serious question to try to address. This is a study that was done in Spain in 2001, and I use it because I think it really clearly documents what happens to people who live near antennas. And I'm just going to describe this graph for you. What we have here on the x-axis are the percentage of people who responded to a questionnaire saying that they experience different symptoms very often. So these are the percentage of people who experience symptoms very often. Everything in red are people who lived within 10 meters or 30 feet of an antenna, all the way out to 300 meters or 900 feet from an antenna. And the first symptom here that you have is fatigue. And you can see here that approximately 70% of those who lived within 10 meters of an antenna experienced fatigue very often, all the way down to about 27% down here in black. So you've got a huge change in these symptoms, the percentage of symptoms. And these are the symptoms in decreasing order. So we have fatigue, sleep disturbance, headaches, feelings of discomfort, depression, memory loss, skin problems, cardiovascular problems, all the way down to nausea, which down here would be the very last one on the scale, and there might not be any difference here at all between those who lived close and far. Everything in red on this, in this box are things that we begin to experience as we age. And so I prefer not to call this electrohypersensitivity. I prefer to call this rapid aging syndrome, because that's what it seems to be. Those are the symptoms. And very often when you talk to people who have developed these symptoms, their explanation is, well, I'm leading a very stressful lifestyle, or, well, I'm just getting older and it's normal for me to have difficulty sleeping. It's normal for me to have aches and pains. It's normal for me not to think clearly anymore because I'm aging, and that's wrong. Because when these individuals go into an electromagnetically clean environment, those symptoms disappear. And if it's due to aging, they shouldn't disappear. How do we objectively measure some of these symptoms? Most of these are highly subjective, and so my research is really trying to look at objective ways of monitoring this and trying to give that information to doctors so that they can help people who are electrically sensitive. When the more people I talk to who are electrically sensitive, very often they tell me that they're very responsive to fluorescent light bulbs, the tube fluorescent and the compact fluorescent. And so we began to do a study to find out, what do these light bulbs emit? And this is an example of an incandescent light bulb. Everything in red shows you the energy coming along the wire. Everything in blue tells you the frequencies that are coming through the air. And what you can see here is a nice 60 cycle frequency, which represents our electricity. And you can see that this line is not perfectly flat or straight or clean. It's got a few little spikes on it. Now, whether this incandescent light bulb is on or off, we get exactly the same pattern. So this light is not contributing to this power quality or to radiation coming through the air. This is simply what's present in that room at that time. This is just one of several compact fluorescent light bulbs that we tested, and you can see there's these high frequencies on the wire, and there's these high frequencies coming through the air as well. A few months ago, there was a television program in Toronto called 16 by 9, and they did a documentary on light bulbs. And this is an example of a woman who happened to have lupus, and she happens to be extremely sensitive to these compact fluorescent light bulbs. She spent 20 minutes in front of a light bulb, and this is what happened to her skin. She went to her dermatologist, and he couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. Eventually, her skin cleared up, and then she realized it was simply whenever she used a light bulb, her skin would break out in this illness. And skin problems is one of the leading causes or symptoms associated with use of fluorescent light bulbs. There are 3 groups in the United Kingdom who have come out against these compact fluorescent light bulbs. One is the British Dermatological Association, for obvious reasons, but people with migraines also suffer, and people with epilepsy also suffer. And so Migraine Action and Epilepsy Action are trying to convince the UK government not to ban incandescent light bulbs so that their members can continue using them. What about diabetes? Well, I started to work with people who are diabetic. And this is a woman that we worked with in New York. She's 57 years old. She's a type 2 diabetic. And she controls her blood sugar through exercise. And this is her blood sugar on 3 consecutive days in gray. We use a different unit in Canada, but I have the units here for those of you who recognize the levels of blood sugar in diabetics. But basically what this is showing is the level of her blood sugar dropped from about 200 down to about 125 after exercising, going for a walk outside after about 20 minutes. And this is on a different day. Her levels were higher. She had a headache. She wasn't feeling well. She walked for 20 minutes and her levels of blood sugar came down. And each time they come down to approximately the same level. Sometimes she didn't feel like walking outside and she would exercise on a treadmill, and this is what happened when she exercised on a treadmill. This is her starting level. Instead of it going down, it actually went up. Every single time it went up. She's electrically sensitive. And so when your doctor tells you, well, get some exercise, and people who are diabetic and electrically sensitive, when they get exercise where they're exposed to a variable speed motor, which is what a treadmill is, produces dirty electricity, and that's what they're sensitive to. So they're reacting in a very negative way. We think that this can actually be used as a diagnostic for doctors who have patients who are diabetic to see if they're electrically sensitive. This is another example of a woman. She's in her 80s and she has type 1 diabetes, had most of her life. She takes medication twice a day, first thing in the morning and just before dinner. And this was the level of dirty electricity in her house, and an electrician went in and cleaned it up. So we just wanted to find out what would happen to her blood sugar. So she volunteered to give us her blood sugar readings first thing in the morning, called fasting plasma glucose levels. And the levels before the filters were installed were 173. The levels that are considered non-diabetic in the morning is 126. So if you have levels above 126, you have a potential problem with regulating your blood sugar. So for a week, her levels on average were 173 before the filters went in, before we cleaned up the power quality, and they dropped to 119. That's actually below, that's a non-diabetic level. Now, we're not saying she's not diabetic. We're saying that her blood sugar was actually exacerbated by the dirty electricity in her home. During that period, she reduced her insulin level from 36 units a day down to 9 units a day. We shared some of this information with the American Diabetes Association, and they didn't want to know anything about it. They're just not interested. They're making too much money selling the strips to measure your blood sugar and the medication to control it. We also worked with people who have multiple sclerosis. And this is an example of a young man. He has primary progressive MS. He has difficulty walking. He was actually fired from his job because they thought he was on drugs, because he would slur his speech, he would stumble periodically, he would swagger when he walked, and it really looked like he was on some sort of medication. We measured the dirty electricity in his home. The levels went up to about 410. And we filtered it, we cleaned it up, and got the levels below 40. And then I asked him if he would simply walk, so I could record his ability to walk unassisted. And this is what he did. So this is the way he would normally walk when he wasn't using his cane. And you can see that his parents he's moved back home. His parents installed a rail for him to hold on to in the event that he loses his balance. 4 days after we installed the filters, I got a phone call from him, and I found out that he was feeling a lot better. 2 weeks later, I went back to his home and we recorded it again. It doesn't look like the same person anymore. So we were actually able to make changes in his the symptoms of his multiple sclerosis. This is another woman. This happened so often that I began to videotape them. So he wasn't the first one that we had success with. He was about the 4th or 5th one. And I kept thinking, no one's going to believe me that someone with MS can benefit so quickly. This is another person. Levels in her home of dirty power were extremely high, and that came from a plasma television set that we know is normally quite bad. And this is with her, she had difficulty with her hands, controlling her hands. Her mother lives with her and feeds her, because you can see here that she can't feed herself. And I just asked her to hold her hands as still as possible so that we could record the amount of shaking. And this is 6 weeks later when we terminated the study. And you can see there's still a little bit of movement, but on occasion she can actually feed herself, and that's what her mother was telling us. We then started looking at other ways of monitoring people who are electrically sensitive, and we know that one of the symptoms are an irregular heartbeat, arrhythmia, a rapid heart rate that people complain about, or just pressure in the chest. And so we used something called a heart rate variability monitor, and we exposed people to a power density of, this is the microwave intensity, of 3 units, when the guidelines in Canada and here in the United States are 1,000 units. So we're well below the federal guidelines. And we expose people for a 3-minute period. Our guidelines allow us to be exposed for 6 minutes to this level with no harmful effect. Your guidelines allow you to be exposed for 30 minutes to this level without any harmful effect. So we're well within the guidelines. And we used a cordless phone to do it. We hooked people up with a chest monitor. They laid down on a bed. We took a cordless phone that radiates as soon as you plug it in. We would plug it into a live outlet. It would give off radiation. We knew exactly what the intensity and frequency was. We then plugged it into a dead outlet, and the radiation would go away. So people didn't know what they were exposed to, whether they were actually being exposed or not. And this would record every heartbeat, or the time between heartbeats, which is what this recording would look like. And you can see the picture of it on the computer as well. Anything that's higher than the average is a slower heartbeat. Anything that's lower is a faster heartbeat. So this is how you interpret the scale. And these are the results for one individual. This was all done in Colorado. And we have 3 different periods here that last about 3 minutes each. And during one of those periods, this person was exposed to the radiation from a cordless phone. And the question is, can we determine from looking at the heart rate variability when that period was? It happened to be period 2, and the heart rate changed from 58 to 56 to 58 beats per minute. So probably no effect of the radiation on this person. Here's another individual. Can you guess when they were exposed? Okay, it's pretty obvious. We simply turned on a cordless phone. They were exposed to the same type of radiation they would be if they were using a cell phone. Their heart rate went up from 68 beats a minute to 122. We unplugged it or plugged it into a dead outlet, dropped to 66 beats per minute. We plugged it in again, jumped up to 129 beats per minute. So it's affecting your heart. And if you have heart disease or any other potential problems, causing your heart to beat this quickly is not healthy for you. Basically, you know, if we look at some of the objective evidence, we've got skin disorders, we've got blood sugar disorders, we've got neurological disorders that I've talked about, heart rate, and if you think of this rouleau formation as a blood disorder, that is affecting between 10 and 100 million people in the United States. And if we add mobile phones to it with cancers, infertility, and behavioral problems, we're really talking about a pretty serious illness. What can you do if you have electrohypersensitivity? This young woman is wearing a fabric that has silver in it, silver fibers, and they reflect the radiation. And so this is the length to which some people have gone to protect themselves. And when people contact me who want advice, I tell them they have to do 3 things. One is reduce their exposure, so you have to measure it, find out what it is. The second thing you have to do is build up your immune system so that your body can tolerate it. And the third thing is to detoxify your body. Very often you will have toxic chemicals in your body. The one we're most concerned about is mercury. And doctors need to know this information as well, because when someone with electrical hypersensitivity goes to them, very often what they will say is, oh, well, you've got a psychological problem, and we'll recommend you to a psychiatrist. And that's not what they need. Facts don't cease to exist because they're ignored. We're up against a multi-billion-dollar industry trying to get the information out. What I'm very keen on is protecting young children, particularly in schools and home environments. I'm also really concerned about people who have developed this sensitivity, and I'd like to help educate doctors so that they can help their patients much more effectively. Thank you very much.